A stereotype is defined as a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of person or thing. Greetings to fellow students, teachers, and whoever managed to stumble across this seminal piece of art. My name is Richard Goodacre, and I'll be analysing and unpacking ways in which New Zealand filmmaker and writer Taika Watiti defies stereotypes and conventions in some selected works. The works that I'll be unpacking for this essay: Taika's short film Two Cars, One Night from 2004, Boy from 2010, and Hunt for the Wilderpeople in 2016. Taika Waititi is one of New Zealand's most recognisable and loved filmmakers, with audiences responding positively to his off-the-wall style of humour and his exploration into the human condition. His light-hearted approach to dark subject matters is a nice reprieve from how Maori culture is usually depicted on screen, namely the iconic Once Were Warriors. His films include Two Cars, One Night, Eagle vs. Shark, Boy, What We Do in the Shadows, Hunt for the Wilderpeople, Thor Ragnarok, and will soon tackle the iconic anime Akira. When conducting research for this essay, I stumbled across this rather pertinent quote given by Taika when promoting Hunt for the Wilderpeople in 2016 on Morning Edition. Indigenous people in films, it's all like nose flutes and panpipes and, people talking to ghosts, which I hate. We really wanted to throw that whole thing away. And I think that perfectly summarizes his mindset throughout his whole filmography, wanting to branch away and make a statement of that narrow mindset of Maori culture. To give you a rundown on the techniques that will be analysed, in Two Cars, One Night, I will talk about how perception and reality intertwine, challenging conventions and power dynamics. In Boy, I'll talk about how Taika effectively challenges stereotypes through humour and parody, and I'll demonstrate how the interaction between two polar opposites creates more nuanced characters in Hunt for the Wilderpeople. I'll also give excerpts of my own writing and show you how Taika has influenced my own work, as well as give you tips on how you can challenge stereotypes in your own writings. Two Cars, One Night is a short film released in 2004 and tells the story of three children abandoned outside a pub in Te Kaha. Overcome with boredom, our main two protagonists, Romeo and Holly, strike up a conversation and develop a deeper connection than either of them could have anticipated. In Two Cars, One Night, Taika challenges the notion that neglectful parenting equals troublesome children. He uses the setting of a pub parking lot to illustrate to the audience a rough backstory, but immediately imbues it with humour upon being introduced to our main characters. This is a tonal shift to how previous stories have been handled on screen, previously with a lot more heaviness. The stereotypical notion of maturity equals age is challenged through dialogue of the two leads, contrast of perception versus reality in the behaviours of the two brothers, and at the end a shift in common power dynamics between the two leads. The following are excerpts to showcase the elements at play. Let's look at the first part here. Now, on the surface, Romeo imitating car noises and mimicking driving doesn't seem that important. Doesn't seem that significant, does it? But in reality, it sets up tone. It lets the audience relax and lets them know that this dark subject matter will be given a light-hearted approach, as opposed to other stories in this vein, which are dealt with a lot more intensity. Also, on the surface, you might assume that the two leads bickering back and forth is just the realities of kids communicating, which could be true, but also could be a send-up of the romantic comedy trope of two leads being at odds at first and then realizing they're meant to be together and coming together at the end. Eddie is the antithesis of his brother Romeo. Whilst Romeo is presented as a more boisterous, hyperactive showboat, typical behaviour you'd say for someone that age, Eddie is more quiet and reserved and has drive and ambition. There's also a perception of this reality relationship at play here. Romeo representing the perception of kids with a tough upbringing, whereas Eddie represents the more diverse aspect of humanity, suggesting that becoming a problem child because of one's background isn't a foregone conclusion. The scene also questions maturity, and if maturity and age are necessarily correlated. The power and lure of the ring transfers the balance of power to Holly. This is a change from the normal romantic comedy trope of the woman being the object of the male protagonist's affection, the male being the chaser and the woman being the chased. This flips those stereotypical dynamics on its head. This can also be seen as a subtle nod to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, which brought attention to New Zealand film on an international scale. Although Hollywood might have you believe that love can be found in a select number of conventional places, Two Cars One Night shows that love is unpredictable. Sometimes it can sprout out of what on the surface seems like one of life's more traumatic moments. Exploring child relationships is rarely covered in cinema, particularly in 2004 when this was released. This gives it a new take on a subgenre that has become too formulaic and tiresome, even for back then. It is also often assumed children are too young to grasp the concept of love, and again it puts into question age and maturity and whether that's correlated. A second film, Boy, is set on the east coast of New Zealand in 1984. Boy, an 11-year-old child and devout Michael Jackson fan, gets a chance to know his absentee criminal father, who has returned to find a bag of money he buried years ago. Boy, Excerpt 1. Taika's off-the-wall brand of humour is evident here in Boy's imagination. The humour and fanatical way Boy tells stories of his dad sets up the tone for the rest of the film. Much like Two Cars One Night, this will be a light-hearted approach to a dark situation. The way the character of Boy deals with the reality of an absentee father is a coping mechanism that you don't see explored often in these kind of stories. The fact that Boy is able to maintain a happy disposition empowers the character and is a welcome change from relentless sadness a story like this can evoke from an audience at a continually downtrodden character. Boy, Excerpt 2. Boy's father is a definite parody of an absentee father, and a person on the surface that appears to be going through a midlife crisis. Do you picture a leather jacket, motorcycle, and a tough guy persona? He ticks all the boxes, but rather than just assume he is that way because he just is, taking the time to explain it immediately gives him more layers and nuance as a character, and makes him more empathetic to the audience. Maturity and age is once again questioned, but this time it's flipped around, with an adult not wanting to escape adolescence. Boy and his father discover they can bond over commonalities, as they both use imagination to escape the perils of reality, with Boy's dad feeling more comfortable in that realm, as evidenced by wanting to be referred to as Shogun. It also continues a theme in Taika's films of characters not wanting to front responsibility. Boy, Excerpt 3. Hunt for the Water People was released in 2016, and the story centers around Ricky Baker, a problem child from the city who's bounced from foster home to foster home and gets taken in by a reclusive country couple, Hector and Bella. After a short period of adjustment, things start to go well until the untimely death of Bella. This causes child services to want to take him back to the orphanage. Ricky runs away into the bush, and what follows is a national manhunt to locate Ricky and Hector. Excerpt 1. Differences come to light when Heck, an introverted middle-aged man from the country, tells Ricky that it's best for him to go with child services. There's a communication breakdown when Ricky begins reciting Tupac lyrics, and Heck finding it difficult to process such a response. The stereotype of Ricky is on full display here as a kid who emulates gangster rappers he listens to, almost living vicariously through them, and is a parody of rap culture and the perceptions of those who listen to that kind of genre by an older generation, particularly when Ricky suggests that he's destined to die in a drive-by. Here's a second excerpt I've picked out for Hunt for the Wilder People. Excerpt 3. As you may have picked up, Excerpt 2 bears a lot of similarities to Excerpt 1. Taika cleverly uses repetition to highlight changes that have come about over their journey, and the rapport they've made along the way. The revelation by Heck that he has been in prison builds understanding between characters, as well as sympathy and empathy, and also adds a dimension to the characters and humanizes them. By trying to convince Ricky to go with child services and his aversion to the title Uncle, it also highlights the overarching theme in Taika's work of an adult not wanting responsibility. Now I'm going to offer up some writing advice that might guide you during the process, especially as it pertains to building character. Number 1, base character on someone you know. After all, you know the person well, and their various traits and idiosyncrasies, that it can be an effective reference point to jump off and can prevent you from falling into old habits. The next 2 points kind of blend in together. If your aim is to highlight the ridiculousness of certain stereotypes, lean into those antiquated perceptions a bit. But always punch up. Punching up is a term most commonly used in the world of comedy. It essentially means don't make the oppressed character the butt of the joke. Instead, you should aim at the oppressor. Taika is brilliant at this, making his character so over the top that it's clear he's winking at the audience. Number 3, write an inciting incident, which creates more understanding between characters, as well as subsequently ceasing to be a caricature and become more human. This is an excerpt from my own writing. This is a sample of what will eventually be a sketch of film, highlighting the various annoyances of living life as a disabled person. I'd first like to avert your attention to the names of the characters. This is a rib at the ultra-American names that for cops you see in popular media. Also a bit of a shameless shout out to Beverly Hills Cop. I've placed the disabled character as a cop out in force to question this idea that if you put your mind to it, you can achieve anything. What I personally deem as toxic positivity. I also created the barrier of steps to strengthen this, but also as a reference to how inaccessible places still are in 2019. I purposely made the character of Carter unlikable to question the positive light wheelchair users are always put in. Ignoring the diversity of humanity, some people are just unlikable, regardless of impairments. To summarize, stereotype isn't necessarily a dirty word. Ideas become stereotypes from being so popular that they've become overused and almost expected. A writer might dive into the world of stereotypical characters and cliched expressions because it's a proven device that has been effective in the past, but much like doing anything over and over again, the desired effect diminishes over time and grows tiresome. If you're presenting a character that is the embodiment of a negative stereotype, with no or little attempt to add a layer of dimension to the character, you can run the risk of getting immediate blowback from your reading audience. Ascribing negative traits to an often already marginalized group of people, especially when depicted on film, can have real-life ramifications, giving credence to those who hold those beliefs, and consequently being the catalyst to shape others. Taika's films have served to change the lens in which culture is looked through, by humanizing the oppressed and those dismissed by society for one transgression. He is able to keep a light-hearted tone whilst not shying away from life's darker elements, rendering it more palatable to a viewing audience. By playing with stereotypes, he is essentially and effectively pointing a lens at the action and a metaphorical one at society while subsequently empowering the film's subjects. He encourages future and present writers to spread their creative wings when developing characters and/or story. I hope this essay has been helpful and insightful to you all, and thank you for listening.